on the other one, you bastard!
The brilliant thing about mainline that's not really present in other more expensive lines that you can collect in Transformers is the surprise factor. Given that you're likely to purchase more figures than you would otherwise, when one rises to the top, it's all the more special. The deluxe lineup is often the progenitor of this. For example, Siege Spinister. He rose up against a losing matchup in the fan vote and delivered one of the best experiences in all of Siege. And going further back, Warpath and High Noon War for Cybertron Optimus Prime delivered such amazing experiences that I do think they may outrank some of the more recent ones. Although I don't really know because one of them I don't have and one of them isn't even out yet. But today I thought I would discuss what I personally believe to be the best example, and what remains my favourite deluxe of all time. Greetings Cybertronians, I'm DrLockdown, and today's diagnosis pertains to Titan's Return, Deluxe Class, Triggerhappy. Now these days the fandom is pretty used to leaks from the likes of Tauntaun and Prime Verbose Prime, but if memory serves me correct, Titan's Return was the first line where we got a glimpse of this pretty shameful embargo system. We're all just sitting around there and bam, the paint scheme photos have dropped. Oh, if only we knew what was to come. But most of the attention was initially drawn to Hot Rod and Optimus Prime, the latter of which promised a pretty nifty octane, especially considering the currently available alternative was deeply scorned by the community. Can't say I agree with that outlook though, but it was what it was. It wasn't until Triggerhappy came out that people truly started to adore him, and by God did they give him love. I saw him on a shelf, got him as an impulse purchase, and then promptly never saw him again. Granted, it's not as frustrating when compared to today's situation of Earthrise Wave 2 being Amazon exclusives in Australia, and yes, it's that painful, but it's still sad that many people missed out on this masterful fellow. Why? Well, in vehicle mode, my word, you can already see right off the bat how much love they put into this thing. As its own thing, it's as if they took the X-Wing from Star Wars, removed the unnecessary extra wings, and modernized the whole thing without ruining the original intent in the process. There is so much detail on this thing, to the point where I think this may be one of the most beautiful space fighter modes I've ever come across, period. The cockpit is positively gorgeous, with the perfect amount of mechanical detail that doesn't go too far, so as not to distract from the wonderful blue window. You'd think that transparent blue juxtaposed with blue plastic would be a bit much, but it works surprisingly well. The paint also works marvelously, with gold and silver dotted around the top section. They even added some on the legs back here to tie the whole thing together. Speaking of, they've got what I assume is tamper-graphed white on the front here. I'm not sure why they bothered, but it works pretty well, as subtle as it is. I adore the way the back section works, with the knee spikes working perfectly in tandem with the stabilizers, or whatever they're supposed to be. I'm not really a jet guy or a guy who knows that much about the vehicle modes he reviews, but the way this is designed is, well, amazing. I've heard complaints that the section surrounding the legs is a little bit messy, but I'm sorry, I just can't agree. I mean, sure, the connection tabs could be a little stronger, but on a deluxe this small it doesn't really matter. It's still perfectly swooshable. And the wingspan, dear God, the wingspan. At this point I'm well and truly running out of synonyms for beautiful and gorgeous, because even though everything in this jet mode is pristine, these are especially so. They hit just the right Goldilocks zone in their length, and although they're not ridiculously long, they make an awesome impression. The wing details look gorgeous and are expertly complemented by the shiny bronze thrusters. And if that wasn't good enough, man, if that wasn't good enough, the cannons are coincidentally Siege Blast Effects compatible. Most of the cannons are Siege Blast Effects compatible. It's as if this toy was tailor-made for future DrLockdown. Now, as a fairly new reviewer at the time, in fact I'm still relatively inexperienced, I found this to be a pretty nifty purchase upon my first play period with him. I even had a very rudimentary script at the time, which I'm only just remembering now that I've realized there are conflicting script file names in my documents folder. However, since then, I've actually purchased the original Generation 1 figure, and I have even more respect for the Titan's Return version, because Jesus, this is rough. I realized that Hasbro was kinda left out in the cold when Takara decided to f*** off after the 86 movie, but even as post-movie G1 toys go, this is pretty daft. Comparing the two, you can really see the passion for the craft of designing a transforming robot in the newer rendition, compared to the borderline amateurish attempts that Hasbro flumped out in the late 80s, or lateys. Yeah, maybe not. I'm not Thew. Puns really aren't my thing. The nose cone is stubby and overshadowed by these ridiculously oversized vents that don't even end up being painted, whereas the new one is bulkier yet somehow more sleek, and easily blends into the new ventilation system. Also, this one's actually painted. The guns on the old in both cannon and wing sections are bulbous and way too short, whereas the new ones are thinner and meaner. These caps look stupid, and the hinge is hella distracting. Replace that with some sweet stabilizers and silver and bronze highlights. Sure, you could complain about the visible foot hinges, but aside from being nitpicky compared to the alternative, there's just no contest. The wings were way too short and fat on the original, and the Decepticon symbol covered up way too much of the detail on the stickers. And sure, you lose the metallic blue on the new, but the proportions are way better. The only thing that the original has over the new version is the fact that it comes with some sort of blowpipe. And even then, that's not to say you can't get an actual blowpipe from a line 2 years down the line these days, if that makes any sense. If you are absolutely dead set on having a Target Master partner for the newer version, you can hunt down the Siege rendition. At the time of writing and possible recording and release, he's a pretty easy Battle Master / Target Master to come by, but personally I feel there's enough here to keep your interest anyway. Although, word of warning, there's nowhere to peg it in vehicle mode. You'll need the Takara version for that, which already comes with the Target Master defeating the purpose. That's not to say this set is blowpipeless though. As is customary with most Titan's Return figures, Triggerhappy comes with a Headmaster partner, or Titan Master as is referred to on the box. Now these days most people are pretty accepting of such, but upon the figure's release this was somewhat a point of contention. Many people were pissed at the concept of fan-favorite characters getting forced into the Headmaster gimmick, more so than the Combiner gimmick oddly enough. Hell, even I was pretty annoyed at first, but in time I came to not just accept it, but also love the insane engineering that such a design decision presented. But anyway, Blowpipe is basically a Titan Master-ified rendition of the original Target Master, although outside of the head it's a little difficult to tell given the absolute lack of paint. I think it's an alright sacrifice though, considering how much the main body has. Anyway, given its cross-compatibility, the Titan Master is pretty small in its standard size, and its articulation is about the same as any other Headmaster. That is to say, pretty shit. It's okay though, it's a tiny little partner, not much you can do. In order to fit him into the cockpit, you will need to fold down the nose cone, but it's not really that inconvenient, although whilst on the topic, if you fold down the wings, you can form a pretty nifty landing pose. I always loved this functionality, even if it wasn't intended. Personally though, I don't see this as blowpipe. I prefer to go by the Japanese Transtector system, which is pretty rare amongst local Aussie fans, but whatever. It's just how I do things, and regardless of which way you take it, this is truly a remarkable alt mode. Once again, it's one of the best generation's jet modes, Cybertronian or otherwise. I know a bunch of people cite his mold mates Misfire and Slugslinger as the superior versions, but I have to disagree. There's just something about the sleekness that makes the original figure far superior, whether it's the mean blue, the awesome paint aspects, sharp angles, or sheer swooshability. Actually, it's probably all of those things combined. Anyway, size-wise, he's average for a deluxe at the time. Back in the Prime Wars trilogy, size classes were very much just size classes, as opposed to the more common price points we see today. As such, he's got some decent heft to him. Honestly, there's practically nothing I can substantially fault him with in this mode. Even his weapon storage blends in perfectly, adding extra guns to the side, or in my case, extra gun, singular. Yes, it's been a while and I've sadly lost one of them. It'll probably turn up someday, but until then, he still looks pretty neat without them. Besides, although these are all right, they are somewhat compromised for the sake of the Titan Master compatibility. Not as bad as some other examples in the line, but far from the best either. Either way, though, it's an absolutely fantastic vehicle mode. However, that's only really enough to make this a pretty neat Transformer. I mean, anyone who's been around the fandom long enough knows how good he looks in bot mode, and hell, anyone who saw this guy on the shelf probably knew that from the get-go. But that's not where the brilliance lies. Well, it does, but there's a place where it does even more so. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Transformation Heaven. Triggerhappy's transformation is interesting, even amongst the amazing engineering present in Titan's Return. I mean, Titan's Return as a whole was amazing, there's a reason why it's getting reissued. A fact that I only just realized halfway through filming. But no, it's not the same as Generations Warpath or Siege Spinister. Those figures were made with the end goal of matching a certain aesthetic. For example, Siege Spinister was supposed to match the G1 box art, and Warpath was supposed to just match, well, whatever design they came up with. Triggerhappy's transformation is special. It's designed for the transformation's sake. I mean, it kind of makes sense when you realize how awful the original toy was, but they've really gone all out in making this a unique transformation that shares very little DNA with the original. First thing you want to do is remove the Headmaster, of course, because, well, without doing that, you're not going to be able to transform it properly. And you, of course, want to pull in the landing gear. You can also close up the cockpit and bring this front section down and onto the back. Might as well do the arms first. You want to untab them from the side there, bring down the wings there, and that actually untabs that, of course. Then bring this down on its octagonal hinge, and bring the fist out as well. Then when that's all done, you pull the arms out from the feet, and that will mostly unlock the whole section. They're tabbed into the sides there, and they're also tabbed into there, and if they're still tabbed in, you can kind of undo that. Unfold the whole leg section. They're a little bit hollow, but they're pretty decent. Bring out the feet like so. Sometimes they will automatically straighten out. If they don't, you just straighten it out yourself. And then we get that aha moment. That moment that defines all amazing transformations. You rotate the torso on its own special hinge, 180 degrees, and then you take the waist section and plug it into the bottom there. fixing up the torso like so. And then it gets even better. You take these double hinges and they fold around the whole thing, completing the aesthetic perfectly. By God, that is amazing! Like, Titan's Return had some pretty damn well-engineered figures, but this just takes the cake with that torso. The way everything compresses together, it's gorgeous, it's brilliant! And the rest is pretty simple. You rotate the waist around, you separate the legs like so. The Headmaster transforms pretty simply, as it always does. You make sure the arms are all in place, and then you use the double hinge to just bring it in like so. I really like the way they did these Titan Masters and the swappable faceplates. It's way better than some of the third-party renditions, which I'm sure we'll get around to eventually. But last but not least, you've got the Headmaster port there, and the head there, and as long as the head is facing backwards and the faceplate is facing forwards, you just plug it in, and I don't know why it's so hard. Usually it's pretty easy, but I guess on camera things do become more difficult. Guys, I just love this transformation. It's the perfect balance of simplicity and complexity, and it is oh so clever and oh so fun. This is why I feel that Mainline is just as valid as Masterpiece. Both can deliver on this fun factor, regardless of the price they present. What I mean to say is, this is some good shit. Triggerhappy is interesting. Not in a bad way, mind you. He is truly an amazing figure through and through, but his robot mode design is pretty unique amongst updates. The Titan's Return line was pretty well known for taking obscure characters and giving them a well-needed greebled update that still remains true to the original source material, or at least a source material of some kind. Triggerhappy is different though. He represents and represented a shift away from the source. A few hallmarks of his design remain, such as the guns on the arms and the thrusters on the shoulders, but this new chest isn't indicative of his source material at all. Whether toon, anime, comics, or shitty toy, this robot design takes the general idea and takes it in a wildly new direction. And by God, it works so well! I mean, take a look at this bulbous nose cone that doesn't even pop up all the way. Sure, other forms of media have tried to make sense of it, but compare that to the awesomely streamlined and immensely detailed way in which the Titan's Return version achieved its look. There's no contest. All the hinges and panels and mechanical details, it's a sight to behold. There are subtle callbacks, such as the tiny circles at the back referencing the lights on the original, but they've taken the rest in a completely different and decidedly better direction. The legs undergo the same change as well. Granted, this may have been foresight in order to get the other two teammates to work, but whatever the case, they work remarkably well. You'd think these 45-degree angled stabilizers would look out of place, but they work, again, amazingly. What they've done here is way more dynamic than just sticking the wheels on the front. The head sculpt is also drastically different, but this time they're edging a bit closer to the source material. See, this is the head that he was given in most media he was presented in, a choice which seemed somewhat confusing when Hasbro at the time typically went for toy accuracy, leaving the toon designs for the Takara Legends line. Whatever the case though, I really like this approach. This head is way more fitting for the psychotic character we know and love. Or don't know and still love, I suppose. I don't know jack shit about the character, I just like the design, and said design works way better with the face-plated look than this blaster knockoff, which is ironic considering the prototype actually stole his head. Funnily enough, the arms are the one part of the design that has remained pretty close to the original, right down to the vents on top of the shoulders. Not to say this isn't an improvement though, because it is in many ways. Some have complained that the guns are no longer a separate piece, which now causes the articulation to be somewhat limited outwards. But thanks to this decision, you get some of the best built-in weapons on any Transformer. The fold-out guns work as both lasers and melee weapons, and need I remind you, these are Siege Blast Effect compatible! Hello, can this get any better? This is the best! What the man? It's at the point where, honestly, I don't give a flying fuck that I've lost the weapons, let alone the Target Master compatibility you can get from later figures. I mean, sure, it's a neat matchup, but the handguns are way better. Also, thank they added not just tabs to keep it in place, but also octagonal hinges to double down on the stability. No more cannon dysfunction, thank God. Now, I know that I've been comparing this to the original, the quite awful original, a lot in this review, but that's kind of how my experience with this figure went down. My favorite deluxe has changed quite frequently over the years, starting off with Darkmount as a kid due to his fiction appearance, then shifting to High Moon War for Cybertron Optimus Prime in my early years of modern collecting due to his transformation, and then finally settling in with old Triggerhappy over here. From the moment I got him, I was in awe with his design. However, it's only recently that I've gotten the OG figure, and since then I've gained a newfound appreciation for what they did here. They could have so easily attempted to match the box art or the cartoon model, and that in itself isn't a bad thing. That's what they did with Spinister, and it turned out pretty awesome. But no, they didn't. They gave this guy a completely original design that retained the spirit, but brought a fresh new outlook to the table. Triggerhappy stands both on his own 2 feet and over the festering corpse of the deeply amateurish post-movie design. Some might consider my criticisms too harsh harsh on a design from such an early part of Transformers history, but when compared to the Takara works from prior, and especially compared to what Hasbro was putting out later down the line, it just doesn't hold up. Triggerhappy overcame the most immense of obstacles, and all without a major media presence. It's a testament to the designers, and I would absolutely love to see more figures done like this in the future. And, yes, we are indeed getting them, but I want more! I crave more! Anyway, articulation exists somewhere between the best of Titan's Return and the standards set today. The Prime Wars trilogy was where Hasbro first started experimenting with higher standards of articulation. However, given the samey nature of the first and final parts of said trilogy, it was most visible within Titan's Return. I feel that the incorporation of a waist swivel is what drove the team to deviate so heavily from the design, and it works immensely well. If this guy had ankle tilts, he'd easily be able to tank it with the best of the recent War for Cybertron figures. I know it's almost standard for the time period, but the articulation still remains remarkable to this day, especially with the perfect tolerances. Nothing here is overly loose, so you can basically achieve anything and everything you want. And size-wise, he is again average for a deluxe. There wasn't much variation in figure sizes during the Prime Wars trilogy, which was to be expected. Sure, he's quite a bit smaller than the original, but I feel it really works for this design. He's not like Stalker, where he desperately needs a Voyager to work properly. Triggerhappy fills out the deluxe price point with near perfection. He's got that special quality, a deluxe quality, even amongst deluxes. So, in essence, I guess he's a deluxe, if that makes any sense. Now, I realize I haven't mentioned many flaws about this figure, but that's because there aren't really any substantial ones. He's just that bloody good. I mean, sure, he's a headmaster, but who gives a shit? He is a shining light amongst the deluxe line in an already good line to begin with, and an excellent example of why screen accuracy or toy accuracy or any form of accuracy for that matter isn't always the most important thing when designing a toy. He is amazing, but he is a toy from 3 years ago, so that does beg the question, why review him now of all times? I mean, Super Megatron just came out, and he's pretty neat, and there's always Nice-C, she's got some rather interesting topics to discuss, but I don't really want to review either of these. No, what I need is a springboard. There is a figure that I've been wanting to review for quite some time this year, but I need a little background first. And now that we have that, well, all of the things that made Triggerhappy amazing relate to why this figure is one of the most disappointing of 2020. I guess I'll see you next time.